Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here. Before today's video, I'd just like to give a big shout out to all of my subscribers, all my supporters who have donated to me via PayPal or via my Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you guys so very much for supporting me in this content. And if you want to continue to support me as well, you guys can also see the links in the description below. And the reason I'm shilling for my PayPal is because I have a sneaking suspicion that today's episode is going to get demonetized, or it's definitely going to be lingering on that territory, and you'll see why pretty quickly. Apart from the fact that this is also just another one of those sort of philosophy and ethics discussion, videos, and those don't typically get as much into the way of views, but I like them and I like the subject matter, and we seem to have interesting conversations in the comments. So yeah, here we go. So today I'm going to be talking about the Bajoran Occupation and what it's referencing in real life, and what it tells us about the Cardassians, and I think what it tells us about the nature of evil. So yeah, let's get on with that. It's going to be a pretty grim one today, but it's one I've wanted to talk about for a long time because I think it tells us a lot about the Cardassian people. So the Bajoran Occupation, it's not lost on anyone what it's alluding to, what real life event it's drawing parallels with. That's of course the Shoah. I call it that because I don't know if YouTube's algorithm might not pick that up. It's also the appropriate word for it. That's what a lot of Hebrews call it, because Shoah just means destruction, and that's all it was. It was just a destruction. The other word implies a sort of a sacrifice. It wasn't. It was just killing for killing's sake. And that's an interesting subject in and of itself. So actually, yeah, that brings us to the first point. Is what were the Cardassians? They were very different. So it's compared, and one of the big comparisons is the death toll, 6 million. Now, personally, for the Bajoran Occupation, that's not enough. Which I know sounds very bloodthirsty, but okay, the Bajorans don't have a huge population. Their birth rate is slightly lower than humans, and they do live on a very big planet, like absurdly big. Bajor is many times bigger than Earth. Even so, given that this was a planet-wide occupation and, a planet-wide conducted genocide, 6 million in a genocide is not much, even by modern-day Earth standards. That's quite a small number. Now, of course, actually, it was much more than 6 million. That 6 million is just a subset. It's a certain group, but many more were killed. But so the first difference, I think, is worth establishing between the Shoah and the Bajoran Occupation is the intention, right? So the Shoah, it's made pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious that their intention was always to kill them. It was always their intention to commit genocide for its own sake. Not if you compare it to its contemporaries, Stalin's communist regime. Stalin killed a lot of people, over 20 million at least. He did it in a very different way. He did it in a way in which the system of gulags and so on and so forth was designed to secure as much utility from people before you killed them. That's not what happened in the Shoah. The Shoah, the prime goal was killing them, and if you could gain some utility from them, that was whatever. It was a very different, and it obviously goes back into the ideology that perpetrated it, which is that they just believed that these people just had to be killed, and that's not what drives the Cardassians in the occupation. The Cardassians, they might develop, it's a lot of the time with these ideologies, these superiority ideologies or racial supremacist ideologies, and this includes anything. They're often They're often a post hoc explanation for how you ended up in that situation. So, for example, sort of white supremacist ideologies only actually emerged really in the late 19th century, and that was largely as a result, and that's sort of after colonialism, as a means of explaining how they got there. You know, they had to, and it's a similar thing, I suppose you could say, to like Roman ideology, and this idea that, you know, the Romans are the chosen, Jupiter's chosen, well, not Jupiter's chosen people, because Jupiter doesn't choose people, because if you know anything about the Roman gods, I mean, they're not as bad as the Greek gods, but this is a huge tangent. But that there is something special and divine about Rome and Romans, and that's how they ended up, you know, with a vast empire and dominion over all of these other lesser peoples. That's the post hoc explanation. It doesn't necessarily bear on the, you know, reality of what happens at the time. Reality of what happens at the time, it's often just sheer luck and coincidence, and that's normally how most empires are built, is just be there at the right place at the right time. And humans just don't like to comprehend that, because we like to add meaning to stuff. So we then that's when we then add that kind of meaning into how did that happen. So with regards to the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, the whole idea of the Cardassians being a superior race to the Bajorans, a superior species, that's only really something that comes very late in the occupation, almost after, perhaps. The people that really, you know, were getting it going, they were just kind of reacting to things that were happening. So my view of what happened during the Cardassian border war, so occupation really starts, you get colonies being set up, trading posts, in the 2320s. By 2329, a full occupation happens. So what happens? I'm going to presume that some kind of big disaster happens on Bajor, and in order to secure their economic interests, the Cardassians occupy to kind of keep things ticking over even after the Bajoran government has collapsed. Because that's normally what happens, is in most empires. That's what the British did in India. They just stood back. Well, the East India Company, they stood back and waited, and it was just until the Mughal dynasty collapsed, and then they just seamless transition. Who's going to argue with it? Because it, you know, keeps things going. Business is still good. As time goes on, that probably became less and less the case, as the Cardassians, then they have their own pressures. So initially, Bajor was just kind of probably a trading outpost, but as the 2330s and 40s into the 50s develop, what they're doing is they're coming under pressures anyway because of the poor, dire state of their population, and this is another thing I'm going to come back to. They've got to put more pressure on Bajor, and that includes the escalation of the occupation. That brings about more resistance, which, you know, it's then a cyclic effect. But they're doing it always with the interest of having a very direct benefit to Cardassian people. Unlike with the Shoah, wherein the benefit was really quite abstract. It was more of an abstract idea that if you remove these people, our society will somehow be better. So that's the first element. I think it was worth talking about is the intention, and the intention is very different. Yes, Goldakat says, and there were probably some Cardassians, probably quite unhinged and probably quite sort of outsider voices, some unorthodox voices who were probably saying, oh, we should just exterminate the Bajorans and take the planet for ourselves. There might have been some who said that at the time, but I can't imagine they were viewed by the Central Commanders particularly wise or taken very seriously, because it's about as crazy an idea as you can take. You know, basically this is you've got it running as a resource that you can exploit because of the dire conditions at your home. Now that really feeds into the second half, and I was going to this kind of the title of this video, Casually Brutal Cardassians. I don't recall which precise episode that comes from, but it's a quote. It's the casual brutality of a Cardassian. And I find that very interesting, because again, I find that very different to the Shoah. For the record, I studied this in my philosophy course. We read Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem. Very good book, worth reading. what do I mean? Why is it different casual brutality? Right. So with the Shoah, with the whole Third Reich regime, one of the things that struck people was how this supposed civilized nation could do something so barbaric. And it's like, okay, well, for starters, hold it right there. Call it civilized nation. I mean, this is still, this is still the nation that's part of the same continuity as the First World War Germany and Frederick the Great's Prussia. It's all on a continuum, and arguably it's that continuum of Prussianism, which is a distinct sort of identity, ideology that evolves. It's essentially the militant aspect, Germany. Starters, were they really civilized? Nah, you can debate the point. Second of all, okay, so how did they do it? They made it mundane, they made it simple, and they made it easy. Because most people, particularly most people who live in a civilized world, have never killed anyone. You've probably, listening in the audience, have never killed anyone. You probably never even hurt anyone badly. Some of you probably never even hit anyone. You probably come very, at some point you maybe have come very close and you've gone, oh. It's very difficult to kill people, particularly in a society where it's deemed just not acceptable. So, how do you get people in on it then? Right, well, people aren't that au fait with killing people, but they're au fait with bureaucracy, with paperwork, with machinery. So you do it with that, right? And that's the key thing about Eichmann and Jerusalem. That's the big takeaway as the Third Reich. And that's kind of the big thing. The Soviets also had it. There was a sense of paperwork, but there was a lot more brutality to it as well. But anyway, it's, the show we're making the point about. What they did, Eichmann is the guy who is meant to have sent all these people to the camps. And you look at him, and he's utterly pathetic. He's just a middle-aged bloke. He's your typical-looking bureaucrat. How did he kill so many people? Well, because he just filled out bits of paper. And then, of course, when it gets to, the kind of the business end of things, well, they say, well, all the paperwork's been filled out, the boxes have all been properly ticked, so, it's not on me. I don't have, it's not my decision, someone from, on high has ticked off this bit of paper that says that this person needs to be killed, so, yeah, I just got to do it then, don't you? That it takes away, on either end, the necessary intention, the necessary malevolence. You don't have to be malevolent, you just have to be thoughtless. You just have to not really think that hard about what you're doing, which, let's be frank, is pretty easy for most people. Most of us go around our day not really thinking about what we're doing because who's got time for that? Tick off the paper, 9 to 5, tick off the boxes, stamp the things in the thing, send off your paperwork, 5 o'clock, off you go home, dinner with the family. And you've killed 6 million people. So that's how that happened in the Shoah, and that's one of the reasons it's so unique, and it's perhaps very interesting. For some describe it as a crime of modernity. Now, the Cardassians, I'm sure they like paperwork. I don't think they needed that much paperwork. I don't think there was that much modernity involved in what they carried out. And this is informed by the line, the casually brutal Cardassians. And also, again, people ask me a lot about where I get this information about Cardassia that I used in my Border War series. The number one source for me was Gul Madred. For a supposed interrogator, that guy spills a lot of beans. And Gul Madred's about the same age of Picard, about 50, let's say, because Cardassians age roughly similar to humans. So that would mean he was born around about 2310. The state of affairs as I see it is he just about experienced this, or his parents will have definitely experienced life before the military, life before the junta, the military regime. has taken over. And he describes it, and I believe it. If my parents have described to me life in the 1970s, and it's utterly inconceivable just how impoverished the country is in the 70s compared to today. Cardassia in the early 24th century is in a very dire state of affairs. I mean, for goodness sake, Gul Madred, who is an officer in the military, and he was a street urchin, right? That's not necessarily a sign of a particularly stable society. And, he talks about his life as a street urchin, and one thing that is very clear is he is very used to cruelty in that he inflicted on others. He's also experienced cruelty inflicted upon himself by other people. And why is that important? Well, because they're desensitized to it. Because it's part of the natural order. My thesis is that the Cardassians didn't inflict anything on the Bajorans that they hadn't previously done to themselves. And, I allude to that with the reclamation colonies, the penal colonies, the gulags. In the early 24th century, they take anyone who's homeless, anyone who's a criminal, whatever, undesirable in any way, political prisoners, and they send them to these gulags, effectively, which are supposedly there to make the world eventually inhabitable. But that's normal for them. That's part of it. It's also very normal for soldiers to come barging through the door for Cardassians in the middle of the night and take people away, or just straight up shoot them. And it's not in most civilized societies. It's not normal in most Western civilized societies. And we really take that for granted. Because in a lot of the world it is. If you're in trouble with with the powers that be, in a good chunk of the world, you can just expect 3 a.m., boots through the door, come up, shoot you in your bed, and then cart you off and bury you in the forest. That's how a lot of places operate, still. And in order to do that, though, you have to be reasonably desensitized to violence and cruelty. Most genocides, there's plenty of them throughout history, most are carried out in that kind of fashion. There's a group of people, whoever you are, be you an insurgent group or a government, you know where these people that you don't like live, and you send soldiers in, and they just burn everything down, round the people up and shoot them. That's how most places do that's how a genocide is generally carried out. Except that's not what happened in the Shoah. But I do think that's probably how, within the Cardassian Union and in their occupation of Bajor, that's probably the majority of practice. If the Cardassians wanted to carry out a genocide against the Bajorans, that's how they would have done it. Or they would have bombarded it from orbit. So their intention is very different from that of the Shoah. Those that carried out the Shoah did so with a very particular... Well, first, they wanted to preserve their peaceable society, their peaceful society, but they still wanted to get all these people killed. So that's how that particular set of circumstances emerge. A lot of the times, there's not that much of a peace when people carry out genocides. There's not much of a peaceful society to worry about, so you'll just do it. Or the region is so disconnected and remote that no one's going to notice. That's how most are carried out. So the fact that the Cardassians, the Bajoran Occupation is not the Shoah. That might have been the intention, and certainly showing the impact, sort of the post hoc impact it has on the Bajoran people. I think that's very interesting, and their attempts to find meaning and find their place after such a trauma. But I think it tells us a lot about the Cardassians, and it really tells us the state of that people, and that it's, as I've previously alluded to, it's not good. Fish swimming among sharks. They punch above their weight to their detriment. They get themselves involved in something that is far beyond them. They're barely hanging on as a society. They were barely hanging on partially be only because they had the Bajoran occupation. I can imagine that conditions on Cardassia probably got, after that, even worse, which is probably what led to the development of the Cardassian dissident movement, which eventually topples the regime, leaves the Cardassia then open for the Klingon invasion, which of course then spurs the Dominion War. So what is this to say? Well, this is to say, really, you have your crimes of modernity, yes, but you have your crimes of humanity. I think a lot of people take it for granted that, a lot of people in the West, we take it for granted that everyone's pleasant, peaceful, and we don't kill each other. And we're unused to violence. We abhor violence. And that's not the case for the rest of the world. You can meet some perfectly pleasant people, perfectly pleasant, perfectly charming people in the rest of the world who may well have at some point in their life killed people and been involved in killing. And why is that? Is it because they're evil? No, I don't think people are inherently evil or good. I think it's, humans are grey. I think it's more a case of circumstances. And really that circles back to one of the reasons we, in the Western world, we live in comfort. Absurd amounts of comfort. Better than humanity has ever seen before. That's our parallel with the Federation. They live in comfort. And they are unable to understand the Cardassians, who just don't. For the Cardassians, inflicting that kind of evil, that kind of cruelty and violence on others is normal, because that's just the world they know, and that's the only way they have been able to survive and, cobble something out of the chaos, has been through violence and cruelty. Like I say, I think the Bajoran occupation, as much as it tells us about, the cruelty of the Cardassians, yes, and it also shows us how the impact on the Bajorans, I think it says a lot about the state of the Cardassians in the 24th century. And it really just goes to show what can happen when people are pushed and when things start breaking down, and, how quickly compassion, morality, right or wrong, go out of the window in favour of utility, of survival. I think that's what it says. So like I say, that's why I don't think it's a good comparison for the Shoah. The Cardassians were doing what they were doing in the occupation to keep themselves going, to prop themselves up, to keep their war effort against the Federation going. That's not what happened in the Shoah. What happened in the Shoah, in fact, they did to the detriment of nearly everything else, to the detriment of their own people, to the detriment of their war effort that was, keeping them from being swallowed up by two huge military machines. And yet they focused more on that than, fighting a war. You could either take this as a statement about the Cardassian occupation or about the Shoah. But those are just my thoughts. Like I say, I'm probably going to get demonetized for this, but this is a conversation I really wanted to have. I've wanted to have it since starting the Cardassian Border War series, and, since wrapping it up and letting people develop their thoughts about it, I think it's worth discussing. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. I will be keeping an eye on the comments because I don't want, the type in there. I don't want any of those. Previous comments have been on my ethics video, the comments were very respectful and very interesting, so I look forward to hearing them. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like I say, remember those links, keep me afloat, and thank you very much.